Hey folks, my name's Ed Trevors. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Anglican priest serving in the beautiful parish of St. Margaret of Scotland that sits on the ancestral and on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Gwe. A couple of weeks ago, I promised that I would share another story from a lady by the name of Kathy Martin. Kathy is a member of the Mi'kmaq community here in Nova Scotia, and she came to our synod and very graciously spoke to us and talked to us about her experiences growing up in her family. She talked about the experiences of her parents, of her extended family, of her grandparents, and of her people. She talked about how her people suffered and how her people coped and how her people persevered. She talked about the Indian Act and the damage that it did to her and to her community. She talked about how the RCMP and the DFO and all these government agencies negatively impacted her community. Now, I want you to keep something in mind. She's in a room with about 350 people who are as pale as I am or paler. All right, people my age and older. There was a few younger people, but for the most part, my age and older. And she's telling these stories, and she's telling these stories of how my ancestors and people that look like my ancestors harmed her ancestors, harmed her grandparents, harmed her parents, harmed her. How the work that was done hundreds of years ago has cascaded down through the generations in her community. How the harm, maybe cascade's not the right word, maybe avalanche would be a better word. What was done hundreds of years ago by colonizing forces are still, that their work, their impact, the harm they did is still being felt in her community today. It was tough to hear. It was tough to hear. And in our world today, right now, there's lots of people out there who are complaining and saying things like, I'm tired of having things shoved down my throat. I'm tired of hearing about this, and I'm tired of hearing about that. Oftentimes, it's directed towards the Indigenous story. Oftentimes, it's directed towards the stories of the LGBTQ. People of color. Immigrants. We hear these, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. Why can't they just fit in? Why can't they just be better? Why do we have to keep hearing about this? Why do we have to keep hearing your agenda? Kathy, before she sang us a song and before she played for us on her drum, and before she told us about her people's call to dance, she said, I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm not telling you this to make you feel ashamed or to make you feel guilty. She said, that does nothing for anybody. That wouldn't do any of us any good. I'm telling you this so that we can all move forward together. And that's the thing. When people tell us their stories, when they tell us of their experiences, when they tell us of their struggles, when they tell us of how they had to fight, and when they tell us of how they were beaten and how they were killed and how their lives were stolen from them, they're not telling us this because they think we will feel bad enough that we can go back in time and change things. They're telling us this because they don't ever want it to happen again. That information that we feel like is being shoved down our throat, instead of thinking of it like a punishment, think of it like a medicine. It's going to be difficult to hear. When Kathy was speaking, I could feel it. I could feel it generating within me. My God, what have we done? But what I was feeling was grief, and I was feeling sadness. I wasn't feeling shame, and I wasn't feeling guilt. I was feeling grief, and I was feeling sadness. Now, those things often can feel very similar. But if you understand yourself, you know the difference. I felt bad in a way that I hope will help me moving forward in my life avoid making decisions that are going to cause so many people so much harm. I hope that moving on in my life, I will be someone who is willing to stand up when my government or the representatives of my nation or the representatives of my people stand and say, we must do this to them and to them and to them. I hope that Kathy's words and Kathy's stories help me stand with those people who are being othered. Those people that we are pointing at saying we must do something about all of them, those minorities, those people groups who are vulnerable. I hope that Kathy's words help me stand with them against my government, against my nation, against my people. And say, no, this is unacceptable. This is wrong. This is not the way forward. I hope that Kathy's words help me to articulate the damage that we know is done when we other people like that. That's the point of those stories that you feel as though, the stories that you feel are being shoved down your throat. It's not to make you feel guilty. There's nothing we can do about the past. But if we're willing to listen, if we're willing to hear, if we're willing to empathize, well, we would find ourselves in a position where we are able to better equip ourselves and our communities and our world to ensure that those kinds of horrors are never unleashed again. We're strong enough to hear their stories. We are tough enough to hear the experiences of people who don't look anything like us. We are secure enough, or at least I hope we are, that we won't be damaged when somebody comes along and says, hey, can I tell you something? Or when somebody comes along and says, I am going to tell you something. Or when somebody comes along and says, hey, I have a book I'd like you to read where I'm trying to tell you something. We don't have anything to fear from people's stories. We don't have anything to fear from people's experiences. We don't have anything to fear from books. Those things are meant for us. Those things are meant to be a catalyst for us to grow in some really wonderfully healthy ways. And we can take it. We can handle it. And once we come to understand that we can handle it, oh, how this world would be better. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that we would all understand just how truly strong we are, how incredibly well built we are, that we could hear and accept and appreciate the stories that our neighbors are desperately hoping that we will hear. Amen. Nemultus.